Hello, my dear friends. People in medieval castles often smelled clean even when they had not touched water for weeks. The truth behind that illusion is stranger than most imagine, hidden beneath blankets, woven into powders, and whispered through stone corridors that never warmed. Every routine they performed fought against a cold that could wound as quickly as a blade. Tonight, Edu will step inside those walls and feel how survival shaped the meaning of hygiene. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soothing background, and let's embark on this journey together tonight. If one were to step into a medieval castle during the heart of winter, the first sensation would not be grandeur or warmth, but a heavy cold that seemed to rise from the stones themselves. The walls were thick and imposing, built to endure sieges and storms, yet these same stones held the chill of past nights and past seasons. No matter how many tapestries hung across them, the cold seeped through every thread. It settled into the floors, crept along the corners, and rose into the air until the entire room felt like a cellar. The idea that a castle was a comfortable refuge is a misunderstanding shaped by stories rather than reality. For those who lived within these walls, winter was not an outside force pressing in, but a constant presence under their feet and around their bodies. The absence of glass in the windows worsened everything. Openings cut into stone walls were meant for defense and light, not comfort. Thin shutters helped little, and even when they were closed tightly, the wind still forced its way through the seams. Every draught carried the bite of the season, brushing against skin, slipping under clothing, and making each breath feel sharper than the last. Walking through a corridor meant facing gusts of cold that moved like invisible rivers, shifting whenever a door opened or the wind outside changed direction. People layered their garments, wrapped themselves in wool, and kept their heads covered. Yet the cold still found its way through folds and seams. Even standing near a wall for too long left the body aching. Inside the great halls where people gathered, large fires burned day and night. The flames licked upward, sending sparks into the smoke-filled air, but their warmth faded long before reaching the far corners of the room. The hearth might have been broad and filled with glowing logs, yet the heat clung to only a small portion of the space. Those who sat or worked close to the fire felt their skin prickle with warmth, but a few steps farther and the air returned to its usual stillness. People often rotated places, warming their hands and feet before retreating to the colder parts of the hall. Clothing held onto the heat for only a brief moment. Once a person stepped away from the hearth, the warmth drained quickly, as if the air itself pulled it away. The contrast between the firelit centre and the dim, cold edges created a strange sense of living in two climates at once. In smaller chambers, the problem was the same. Fires were smaller, chimneys pulled most of the heat upward, and the walls continued to radiate cold. Stone floors chilled every step, even through thick socks. People used rushes and rugs, but these offered only a thin barrier. In many rooms, the temperature felt almost the same as the freezing air outside. Waking up meant facing breath that drifted as a pale cloud in front of the face. Washing or dressing in the morning required determination, as fingers stiffened quickly when exposed to the air. Even holding objects for too long made the hands ache. The body fought constantly against losing heat, conserving what little it could under layers of wool and linen. The cold-shaped behaviour. People lingered near fireplaces not for comfort but for survival. They avoided sitting near walls, kept their beds far from windows, and closed interior doors to slow the drafts. At night, the cold worsened. Fires were allowed to burn low, and the stone absorbed the chill of the sky. Beds were piled with blankets and furs, yet the air outside the bedding remained frozen. Many people slept in their clothing, some wore hats to bed. Touching the floor in the morning shocked the feet. The cold was not a temporary discomfort, but a constant pressure that governed every movement, every routine, and every decision about hygiene and daily life. This environment made the act of staying clean a complicated task. Water carried the cold more intensely than air. Even slightly warmed water cooled the moment it was poured. Touching it with bare skin could sting, and lingering exposure risked numbness. Steam vanished almost immediately. Any attempt to bathe or wash in open space meant facing the air that clung tightly to wet skin and pulled heat from the body. The simple act of removing clothing became a challenge. Skin that was exposed even briefly reacted with goosebumps and shivering that could last for minutes. People learned to move quickly, to minimize exposure, and to plan every hygienic action around the unpredictable chill that filled the rooms. Life in such conditions meant that the idea of true warmth was rare. Only the immediate area around a blazing hearth brought temporary relief. For most people, especially servants who moved constantly through corridors and courtyards, the cold accompanied each step. It shaped their health, their habits, and their expectations. Cleanliness became a practice adjusted to survival rather than comfort. The castle could protect bodies from enemies, but it never shielded them from winter. The cold was a companion as present as any guard or servant, always lingering just out of sight, pressing against skin and breath. The unyielding chill of the castle reveals how every habit of daily life was shaped by the struggle to stay warm. The difficulty of maintaining comfort only becomes clearer as we look at how people tried to stay clean in these conditions. Some of their strategies, born out of necessity, were far stranger than they initially appeared. Bathing fully inside a medieval castle was a task that most people avoided unless there was no other choice. The cold that filled the rooms did not merely cling to the air, but pressed against every surface, making the idea of exposing the body to water feel like inviting illness. Even the thought of removing layers of wool and linen was enough to make the skin prickle. People believed that a sudden chill entering the body after bathing could weaken the lungs, disturb the humours, and open the door to fever. These beliefs were strengthened by the experience of living in stone rooms where warmth disappeared almost as soon as it appeared. The fear of falling ill was not an exaggeration in a world where recovery was slow and uncertain, and so the act of bathing became something reserved for rare moments rather than a regular habit. The process of preparing a bath required more effort than most modern people can imagine. Water had to be drawn from wells or carried from nearby streams, each bucket heavy and cold. Heating it demanded piles of wood, which itself was a resource that required labour to collect and ration through the winter. Fires built for boiling water produced steam that quickly cooled in the surrounding air, making servants move faster to keep the bath water at a tolerable temperature. Every step required time and coordination. A single bath could involve several people working for hours before the bather even stepped into the tub. For most families, the labour alone was enough reason to avoid bathing unless necessary. When someone did bathe, it usually happened only during transitional moments of the year, such as the shift from one season to the next or before significant events. Weddings, feasts, and the arrival of important guests sometimes justified the effort. On such occasions, wooden tubs were placed near the hearth to capture what little warmth the fire could offer. Even then, the room remained cold outside the small circle of heat. The air shifted constantly as people moved through the space, letting draught slide between the shutters and across the floor. Anyone stepping out of a warm bath risked being struck by the chill immediately, which only reinforced the belief that bathing was dangerous. Most people learned to treat bathing as a deliberate ritual rather than a casual action. They tested the water repeatedly, adjusted their clothing carefully, and entered the tub slowly to avoid the shock of cold air and warm water meeting the skin. Once settled, they washed as quickly as possible, mindful that every moment spent wet increased the risk of losing body heat. The steam rising from the water offered brief comfort, but it vanished into the stone walls almost instantly. No amount of heated water could overcome the chill of the room. Servants sometimes brought additional buckets of warm water to maintain the temperature, but even these efforts provided only fleeting relief. For many castle residents, especially those who worked long hours or lived in the less heated sections of the fortress, bathing felt more like an ordeal than a cleansing experience. The challenges were not limited to the physical environment, but also to the aftermath. Drying off took time, and cloth towels absorbed moisture slowly in the cold air. Damp skin became a liability. Hair took far longer to dry and sometimes froze lightly near the ends during the coldest months if not kept close to the fire. Every aspect of bathing created multiple chances for the cold to settle into the body, and people weighed these risks carefully. Because of these concerns, many individuals relied on partial washing to maintain cleanliness. Rinsing the hands, face, and specific areas of the body with warm water felt safer and more manageable. This approach minimized exposure and reduced the amount of water needed, saving labor and fuel. The transition from full bathing to partial cleansing was not seen as neglect but as practical wisdom. People understood the limits of their environment and adapted accordingly. The few who insisted on regular baths were often viewed with a mixture of admiration and concern, as if they were inviting illness by defying the conditions around them. The cultural understanding of bathing was shaped not only by climate but also by necessity. The cold defined what people believed the body could endure. They observed that those who bathed too often fell ill more easily, which reinforced long-held fears. Without knowledge of germs or circulation, they attributed sickness to exposure and imbalance. These explanations made sense in a world where the air itself felt hostile for much of the year. People learned to trust these observations, passing them down through families and reinforcing the idea that limiting full baths was a sensible choice. Inside the castle, where drafts moved unpredictably and warmth was a fleeting comfort, the practice of avoiding full bathing became part of the rhythm of daily life. The smell of wood smoke lingered on clothing, sweat soaked into layers of fabric, and the cold shaped every decision about the body. Cleanliness was measured not by modern standards but by survival. What mattered most was keeping the body warm, protected, and stable. Bathing fully was simply too risky, too laborious, and too deeply connected to the threat of falling ill. People adapted to these realities, finding smaller, safer ways to remain clean without exposing themselves to danger. The struggle to stay warm made the act of bathing feel like an indulgence that carried its own dangers. The choices people made about cleanliness were shaped entirely by the cold that surrounded them. Some of the compromises they relied on reveal how inventive they had to be to avoid the risks of a full bath. Cleaning the body inside a medieval castle required methods that could protect warmth as well as remove dirt. The cold air that filled the rooms made full bathing feel dangerous, so people turned to practices that allowed them to remain covered while tending to the skin. Warm linen cloths became one of the most dependable tools. These cloths were heated gently near the hearth, not to the point of steaming but just enough to bring comfort when pressed against chilled flesh. The warmth soaked into the fibres and lingered only briefly once exposed to the air, so the process had to be done carefully and quickly. Servants often prepared several cloths at once, rotating them in and out of the heat to ensure that each one carried enough warmth to make the cleansing effective. Using warm cloths allowed people to clean themselves in sections. Instead of removing all their clothing at once, they exposed only one part of the body at a time, wiped it clean, then covered it again before moving on. This method conserved heat and minimized the shock of cold air against damp skin. The clothes absorbed sweat, dust, and oils that accumulated from wearing the same layers day after day. Even without soap, the combination of warm water and friction removed enough residue to feel refreshing. The warmth of the clothes also eased tense muscles, especially those stiff from sleeping in cold rooms or working in drafty corridors. The act of cleansing in this way became a quiet ritual. People stood near the fire or sat close enough to feel a faint heat as they worked. They dipped the cloths into warm water, wrung them out carefully, and pressed them slowly along the arms, neck, and chest. The sensation of warmth against the skin provided a rare comfort. Each section of the body received attention, but only for a short moment before being covered again. Even brief exposure to the air made the skin tighten and the breath catch, reminding the person of why this method existed. The process was neither quick nor slow but steady, shaped by the need to protect the body from losing heat. For nobles and higher-ranking residents, warm cloth cleansing was often assisted by attendants who prepared the linens and managed the water. Servants stood by the hearth, rotating cloths and ensuring they stayed warm enough to be useful. The bather remained near the centre of the room, wrapped in layers that were loosened only when necessary. The attendants worked in silence, moving with practiced precision. They understood the rhythm of warming, wringing, wiping, and recovering the skin. The goal was to avoid any sudden chill, as even a moment of cold against wet skin could unsettle the body. The use of warm cloths also reflected the limited availability of heated water. Fuel was precious, and heating large amounts of water for a bath was wasteful, when compared to warming a much smaller quantity for cloth cleansing. A single basin could serve multiple people if handled carefully. Cloths were rinsed repeatedly until the water cooled, and then fresh warm water was brought from the hearth. This efficiency allowed castle households to maintain hygiene without exhausting their stores of firewood. The method was practical, inexpensive, and adaptable to the cold conditions of the structure. Over time, this practice became so common that it shaped expectations of cleanliness. People judged their state of care not by how often they bathed fully, but by how regularly they used warm cloths to cleanse the skin. The ritual provided a sense of order and routine, especially during long winters when the cold felt endless. It offered a small moment of warmth in an environment where comfort was limited. Even those who rarely approached the hearth for leisure sought its heat when cleansing their bodies, knowing that the brief warmth would help them face the cold halls afterward. Warm cloth cleansing also reduced the risk of illness. People noticed that those who exposed themselves less often to cold air while wet tended to fall sick less frequently. This observation reinforced the belief that the body needed protection from drafts more than it needed full immersion in water. The clothes allowed them to maintain cleanliness without sacrificing warmth. The method fit seamlessly into the routines of daily life, requiring minimal disruption to work or responsibilities. It could be done quickly before bed, after waking, or during quiet moments in the day. The practice carried a sense of dignity for nobles, who viewed it as a refined alternative to the more laborious act of bathing. The controlled environment, the careful handling of linen, and the gentle application of warmth aligned with the ideals of refinement and restraint valued by the upper classes. Even when the castle was at its coldest, the ritual offered a way to feel cared for and orderly. For many, it was not only a method of cleansing, but a way of maintaining identity and status in the face of harsh conditions. Warm cloths remained a dependable method of hygiene because they balanced necessity with safety. With each section of the body briefly exposed and quickly covered again, people managed to stay clean enough without risking the dangers associated with full bathing. The warmth offered comfort, the wiping offered cleanliness, and the structure offered security. It was a method shaped entirely by the cold that permeated the castle walls. The reliance on warm cloths shows how people learned to work with the cold rather than against it. This approach revealed a careful balance between hygiene and survival. Certain practices focused on the most vulnerable parts of the body hint at measures far more revealing than they first appear. Keeping the feet clean inside a medieval castle was a matter shaped almost entirely by the cold that settled across the floors and drifted through every corridor. The feet were the first parts of the body to feel the impact of damp stone and chilled air. Every step against the ground sent a quiet shock upward, reminding people that the castle's walls protected them from enemies but not from winter. The cold gathered around the ankles and toes, slipping through layers of fabric and settling between the skin and the wool. Once numbness began, it often spread quickly, making even simple tasks feel slow and heavy. For this reason, caring for the feet became one of the most important routines in daily life, even more essential than tending to other parts of the body. Moisture worsened the problem. Stone floors held the dampness of the season, and the chill soaked through footwear that was never fully insulated. Even thick wool socks could not prevent the cold from settling in if worn too long without drying. When warmth was rare and the air remained consistently cold, the feet became vulnerable to painful cracking, swelling, or infections that spread slowly but stubbornly. People learned that once the feet were weakened, movement became difficult, and work inside the castle could not wait for recovery. Servants who spent long hours walking through unheated rooms suffered the most, as their feet remained in constant contact with cold surfaces. Because of these risks, many households developed routines focused on protecting the feet. Herbal mixtures were commonly used to warm the skin and keep it from drying out. Plants such as rosemary, sage, and mint were crushed and mixed with warmed animal fat or oil before being applied to the soles and heels. The warmth of these mixtures eased stiffness and helped create a temporary barrier against the cold. The smell of herbs also masked the natural odours that came from wearing the same socks and shoes repeatedly. People understood the practical benefits even without knowing the science behind them. The sensation of warmth spreading through the foot after applying the herbs offered both comfort and reassurance. Another method involved soaking cloths in warm herbal water and wrapping them around the feet for short periods. This was done near the hearth, where the warmth lingered long enough to make the treatment effective. The skin softened slightly, making it easier to clean away accumulated dirt or sweat. Once the clothes cooled, they were replaced with new warm ones until the feet felt restored. These sessions were brief, as exposing the skin for too long risked losing body heat. People learned to move steadily, repeating the same motions year after year with quiet discipline. Wool socks played an important role in daily care, though their use came with limitations. Thick wool provided better insulation than linen or leather, trapping warmth close to the skin. However, socks were not washed frequently during winter. Water was precious, drying was slow, and wet wool held cold for too long. Instead, socks were aired out near fireplaces or hung in drafty hallways where the moving air could dry and deodorize them slightly. This process removed some of the moisture trapped inside the fibres, though it never restored them completely. People accepted this compromise, relying on the warmth that wool offered despite the lingering smell or stiffness. Shoes added another layer of protection, but were often made from materials that absorbed moisture easily. Leather stiffened when exposed to cold and softened when damp, creating a cycle that weakened the material over time. People stuffed their shoes with dry straw to improve insulation, replacing the straw when it became flattened or damp. Each change of straw offered renewed warmth and helped lessen the impact of cold floors. Such measures were simple, yet they made the difference between manageable discomfort and debilitating pain. The priority placed on foot hygiene reflected the reality of castle life. Without healthy feet, daily tasks became nearly impossible. Servants who struggled to walk could not carry out their duties, and nobles found it difficult to move between rooms or climb the stairs that wound through the structure. The design of the castle itself required constant movement, as warmth was concentrated only in specific areas. The distance between the hearth and the private chambers could feel long when each step pressed cold into the bones. People also believed that maintaining the warmth and cleanliness of the feet helped protect the entire body. The cold was thought to travel upward, weakening the legs and eventually reaching the chest or head. By caring for the feet, they hoped to prevent illnesses associated with winter, even though their understanding of disease was limited. These beliefs guided routines that were passed down through generations, reinforcing the idea that the feet deserved special attention during the hardest months of the year. The routines surrounding foot care did not eliminate the cold, but they offered moments of relief. A basin of warm water, a cloth steeped in herbs, or a pair of thick wool socks gave people the sense that they were resisting the winter rather than surrendering to it. Even brief warmth brought comfort in a world where the cold was constant. These efforts helped maintain mobility, stability, and a sense of control in an environment shaped entirely by the season. The careful attention given to the feet reveals how deeply the cold influenced every habit within the castle. This concern extended beyond comfort, shaping decisions about health and daily survival. Other parts of the body required similar protection, and the methods developed for them reflected the same struggle to stay clean without surrendering warmth. Caring for the hair inside a medieval castle required caution, patience, and an understanding of how easily the cold could take hold of the body. The stone walls and draught-filled corridors offered little protection, and anything involving water carried the risk of letting that cold settle deep into the skin. Washing the hair was particularly dangerous because it left the scalp wet for far too long. Even warm water cooled almost immediately once lifted from the basin, and any moisture trapped against the head could linger for hours. The cold air slipped through the strands, chilling the scalp and tightening the skin beneath. People learned through experience that a wet head in a freezing environment invited sickness, headaches, or lingering weakness. So they avoided washing their hair except on the rarest occasions. Instead of relying on water, they developed other ways to keep the hair manageable. Wooden combs were used daily, pulled through the strands to remove dust and loosen oils that gathered over time. The sensation of the comb moving from root to tip brought not only cleanliness but also warmth, as the friction stimulated the skin and encouraged circulation. These combs were simple tools, carved carefully with wide teeth that could move through thick hair without snagging. They were kept close to the hearth to ensure that the wood did not stiffen with cold. Touching a chilled comb to the scalp would have been uncomfortable, so people warmed it lightly in their hands before use. To control excess oil and improve the smell, fine powders made from herbs or ground flowers were sprinkled lightly onto the hair. These powders absorbed moisture and created a cleaner feel when combed through. A faint scent remained afterward, masking the natural odours that came from wearing head coverings for long periods. The powders were stored in small pouches and brought out during morning routines or before gatherings. For many, this practice became as important as any other part of their hygiene. It allowed them to maintain a sense of order and freshness without exposing themselves to the cold dangers of washing. The hair was rarely left loose. Throughout the day, it was kept braided or wrapped to protect it from drafts that moved unpredictably through the castle. Long hair trapped cold easily when left exposed, so braiding helped reduce contact between strands and the surrounding air. The tightness of the braids offered warmth, holding the hair close to the head where body heat could circulate more effectively. Noble women often had their hair arranged by attendants, who worked with steady hands to create braids that could endure hours of movement. For men with longer hair, simpler braids or ties served the same purpose. Head coverings played an equally important role. Linen caps, woolen hoods, or soft cloth wraps shielded the scalp and protected the ears from cold gusts of air. These coverings were often worn indoors, not for formality but for warmth. The castle's interior rarely provided enough heat to justify uncovering the head completely. Even those who spent most of their time near hearths kept their coverings close by. The warmth trapped beneath the fabric made the space between the hair and cloth feel more sheltered than the rest of the room. Nighttime routines reinforced the same concerns. Before bed, people loosened their braids but did not wash their hair. Instead, they combed it to remove tangles and dust, then wrapped it lightly to prevent draught from brushing against the scalp during sleep. Bedrooms, even those belonging to nobles, grew cold quickly once the hearth fires died down. Breath hung visibly in the air, and leaving the hair uncovered created discomfort that could last through the night. Wrapping the hair also prevented it from absorbing the cold of the pillows or linens, which themselves were often chilled. The avoidance of washing did not reflect neglect but practicality. People understood the limits of their environment even if they lacked modern explanations. They observed that those who washed their hair in cold weather fell ill more easily or took longer to recover. These observations shaped their habits. It was safer to maintain the hair through combing, powders, and coverings rather than risk a practice that could weaken the body. The method was not perfect, but it was effective enough to maintain cleanliness in a season when warmth was scarce. Even during warmer months, washing the hair remained an occasional act rather than a frequent one. The process required water, fuel, and time, all of which were precious resources. Heating a basin large enough for thorough washing meant burning wood that might be needed later for cooking or heating rooms. The time spent drying the hair afterward extended the vulnerability that people wished to avoid. Combing and powdering allowed them to remain clean while preserving the warmth their bodies needed to endure the castle's conditions. The routine surrounding hair care became part of the rhythm of life within the castle. Each motion was shaped by necessity and repeated with quiet familiarity. The soft scrape of wooden combs, the faint scent of herbs, and the steady wrapping of head coverings formed a pattern that offered both comfort and protection. Cleanliness was adapted to the environment rather than forced upon it. People accepted the limitations and worked within them, finding ways to remain orderly and composed even in the unyielding cold. The careful treatment of hair shows how deeply the cold shaped daily habits and expectations. These routines were not luxuries, but essential adjustments to survive the season. Other forms of hygiene face similar restrictions, and the solutions people created reveal the same tension between staying warm and staying clean. Caring for the mouth inside a medieval castle required methods that balanced caution with practicality. The cold made anything involving water feel risky, yet the need to maintain the health of the teeth and gums persisted through every season. People learned to rely on simple mixtures that could be warmed gently without creating steam or exposing the body to sudden temperature shifts. Lightly heated salt water became one of the most common solutions. The warmth was mild enough to soften residue on the teeth and ease discomfort in the gums, but not so hot that it lost its heat before reaching the mouth. The salt served to cleanse and tighten the tissues, offering a sense of freshness that lasted only briefly in the cold air. Herbal water provided an alternative when salt was scarce, or when additional soothing was desired. Leaves of mint, sage, or rosemary were steeped in warm water, creating a mild infusion. These herbs were chosen not only for their scent, but for the way they eased soreness and left a cleaner taste. The water was always used while still warm, as cold liquid against the teeth felt painful and sent quick shocks along the jaw. People understood that sudden temperature changes could weaken the gums, so they handled the mixtures carefully, holding the cup close to the hearth until the moment of use. The act of washing the mouth was deliberate and measured. People swished the warm mixture gently, letting it move across the gums and the spaces between teeth, before spitting it into a basin or onto a straw. The warmth eased the stiffness in the jaw that came from sleeping in cold rooms or working outside in the winter air. Each rinse lasted only a few moments, as the mixture cooled quickly once exposed to the breath. Even this brief practice provided relief and helped prevent the build-up of residue that accumulated through days of eating coarse bread, dried meat, and thick stews. Cleaning the teeth themselves required a different approach. Without brushes or pastes, people used small wooden sticks wrapped at the end with bits of linen or wool. These simple tools allowed them to rub the surface of the teeth and scrape away stubborn deposits. The cloth absorbed moisture while the wood provided enough firmness to break loose particles of food. The sticks were made fresh each day or taken from bundles prepared by servants who carved them in advance. People valued these tools for their practicality, as they required little effort to produce and could be used quickly without exposing the body to additional cold. The routine of rubbing the teeth with cloth-wrapped stick created a sensation quite different from modern brushing. The movements were slower and more controlled. People pressed gently, aware that the gums could bleed easily during the winter when the air dried them out. The warm breath softened the cloth slightly with each exhale, helping it conform to the shape of the tooth. When moving from one tooth to another, they paused to warm the stick with their hands if the wood felt too cold. Every step of the process reflected an understanding of how sensitive the mouth became during the colder months. Without toothpaste, powders served as the only option for extra cleaning. These powders were made from crushed herbs, ground charcoal, or even fine ash sifted carefully to avoid rough particles. A small pinch of powder was pressed into the cloth before rubbing, adding mild abrasion. The taste was not pleasant, but people tolerated it because it left the teeth feeling smoother. These mixtures varied widely from household to household, reflecting the availability of herbs or materials. No two families prepared their powders in the same way, and most learned their recipes through practice rather than written instruction. Warmth remained central to every part of oral care. People performed these routines near the hearth to keep their hands steady and their bodies shielded from drafts. Standing or sitting near the fire allowed them to work without fear of chilled water or stiffening fingers. The firelight illuminated the space, making it easier to prepare the mixtures and adjust the cloth on the sticks. Although the hearth provided only partial comfort, it created enough warmth to make the routines manageable. Oral hygiene carried social significance as well. For nobles, clean breath and orderly teeth were signs of discipline and refinement. They believed that maintaining the mouth preserved dignity during meals or conversations. For servants, hygiene reduced discomfort during long hours of work and prevented small problems from becoming worse. Regardless of status, people recognized that mouth pain hindered their ability to eat, speak, or rest. These simple routines, though limited, offered a sense of control over one part of the body in an environment that constantly challenged comfort. The limits of medieval knowledge shaped expectations. People lacked understanding of decay or infection, but they recognized patterns. They noticed that warm rinses eased discomfort and that neglecting the mouth led to swelling or tooth loss. These observations guided them more than theories. They adapted their habits to the season, performing oral care more carefully during the coldest months. The goal was not perfection, but stability, and the warm mixtures they created helped achieve that. The routines surrounding mouth and tooth care reflected the same balance seen in other forms of hygiene within the castle. Each practice was shaped by the need to stay clean while avoiding exposure to chill that could weaken the body. Warm rinses, wooden sticks, herbal powders, and gentle movements created a system that worked within the constraints of the environment. The careful attention given to the mouth reveals how survival influenced even the smallest routines inside the castle. These habits balanced caution with necessity, shaping a quiet but essential part of daily life. Certain practices that concern the hands and skin would expose even more of the struggle to remain clean in a world governed by cold. Keeping the hands clean inside a medieval castle was both a practical necessity and a mark of refinement. The cold that drifted through the halls made every touch of water risky, yet the hands moved constantly through daily tasks, gathering dirt, oils, and the residue of meals prepared or consumed in draught-filled rooms. People understood that letting grime accumulate on the hands could lead to illness or discomfort, especially during winter when the skin cracked easily. Warmed water became the primary safeguard. It was heated gently near the hearth, never boiling, and brought to a temperature that eased stiffness without shocking the skin. The warmth helped open the pores slightly, making it easier to remove the residue of the day. Before every meal, basins were placed near the table or carried around by servants. Guests dipped their fingers or allowed warm water to be poured slowly over their hands. The warmth offered immediate comfort, especially to those who had spent hours in cold rooms. The simple act of rinsing the hands created a sense of readiness before eating, as though the body needed a brief moment of cleansing before facing the heavy food that dominated the medieval diet. After meals, the process was repeated to remove grease and crumbs that clung stubbornly to the skin. These short rituals marked the beginning and end of the dining experience, creating a rhythm that guests found both familiar and reassuring. Wine was often added to the water, especially during the coldest months. The alcohol offered mild disinfecting properties, though people of the time did not fully understand why it helped. They only knew that hands washed with wine water felt cleaner and warmed more quickly. The faint scent of wine lingered afterward, masking the mixture of smoke, wool, and cold air that usually clung to the fingers. Wealthier households used wine more freely, considering it a sign of status to cleanse their hands with something that was also served at the table. The warmth and scent combined to create a small moment of comfort in a season when warmth was otherwise scarce. The method of washing varied depending on status. Nobles often had servants pour the warm mixture over their hands, while the water collected in basins placed beneath. This prevented the hands from touching water that had already cooled or carried residue. For servants and lower-ranking residents, washing involved dipping the hands into a basin and rubbing the skin carefully to remove dirt. Even in this simpler form, warmed water made the task easier and reduced the discomfort caused by cold liquids. People dried their hands with linen cloths kept near the hearth, where they absorbed enough heat to prevent the skin from tightening after washing. Because the hands were exposed to the cold more than any other part of the body except the face, caring for them became an essential routine. The skin dried quickly in the winter air, developing small cracks that made every movement painful. Washing with warm water eased the tension, and the addition of wine or herbs provided an extra layer of comfort. People rubbed their hands gently after washing, encouraging circulation and restoring flexibility to stiff fingers. This helped them carry out tasks more effectively, whether writing, sewing, or working near the hearth. The practice of washing hands also carried a strong social meaning. Clean hands were associated with discipline, respect, and nobility. At communal meals, those who arrived with dirty fingers risked judgment from others seated at the table. Nobles believed that proper hand-washing distinguished them from the lower classes, who had less access to warm water or wine. For wealthy households, washing hands became a subtle display of refinement. Servants moved calmly through the hall, carrying pitchers and basins, offering water to guests with practiced motions that reinforced the dignity of the meal. Even in private chambers, where no audience watched, people continued this practice to maintain personal comfort. Rinsing the hands in the morning helped ease the stiffness that came from sleeping in cold rooms. Washing them in the evening removed the residue of the day and prepared the body for rest. These small acts offered moments of warmth that balanced the unyielding cold of the castle. The warmth from the water spread quickly through the fingers and into the palms, making the person feel more grounded in an environment dominated by stone and winter air. The importance placed on clean hands reflected a broader understanding of how the body functioned in the cold. People observed that if the hands became too dry or cracked, the pain could make even simple tasks difficult. Maintaining the health of the hands allowed them to work, eat, dress, and handle tools without discomfort. Warmed water became a practical solution that fit into the daily rhythms of castle life. It required little fuel, little preparation, and offered immediate relief. This routine also revealed how people adapted their hygiene to survive the environment. They sought methods that improved cleanliness without risking exposure to the cold. Wine water rinses, warm cloths, and careful drying created a system that balanced efficiency with comfort. It was not perfection, but it was enough to maintain health through long winters. The ritual of washing hands, though small, became a pillar of hygiene that touched every part of life in the castle. The warm rinses used for the hands show how deeply the cold shaped even the simplest routines within the castle. These practices balance cleanliness with caution, ensuring that comfort was never sacrificed in the struggle against winter. Certain methods used for more private areas of the body reveal an even more delicate approach to staying clean while preserving warmth. Cleansing the most sensitive parts of the body inside a medieval castle required methods shaped almost entirely by the cold that filled every room. Exposing the lower body to chilled air, even for a brief moment, carries the risk of discomfort, weakness, or lingering illness. People understood through observation that using water directly on these areas during winter caused the cold to settle deep into the skin. For this reason, washing with water was avoided unless the weather allowed it. Instead, people relied on warm linen cloths that offered both cleanliness and protection from the draught that drifted constantly across the stone floors and narrow corridors. The clothes were prepared with care. Linen was chosen because it absorbed warmth quickly when placed near the hearth and held it long enough to cleanse the skin without cooling too fast. Before use, the cloths were dipped lightly into warm herbal infusions. These infusions were made from plants believed to soothe irritation and prevent odour, Rosemary, lavender, and mint were commonly used, steeped gently until the water took on their scent. The clothes were then wrung out carefully to remove excess moisture. Too much water risked dripping onto the cold air, lowering the temperature of the skin. Too little prevented the herbs from doing their work. People learned to feel the cloth with their hands, judging its warmth and humidity with practiced familiarity. The cleansing itself was done quickly and quietly. The person exposed only the necessary part of the body, always keeping the rest covered to conserve warmth. The warm cloth was passed gently across the skin, absorbing sweat or residue that had built up over the day. Once the cloth cooled, it was replaced with a fresh, warm one. This rotation continued until the person felt clean enough to dress again. Even in noble households, the process was direct and practical, guided by the need to avoid any lingering chill. The warmth of the cloth eased tightness in the skin and brought a brief sense of comfort that contrasted sharply with the cold air pressing against the rest of the room. Herbs played an important role in this routine. Without access to soaps suitable for sensitive skin, people relied on natural mixtures to maintain a sense of freshness. Some households prepared stronger infusions for those who suffered irritation during winter, as the dry air and multiple layers of clothing could cause discomfort. Others preferred milder herbs, believing that strong scents interfered with the body's natural balance. Regardless of the mixture chosen, the process remained the same. Warmth, speed, and caution shaped every movement. People understood that the health of these private areas influenced their overall well-being. Irritations, infections, or discomfort could make daily tasks more difficult. Walking through the cold corridors or sitting on chilled wooden benches became painful when the skin was already sensitive. Maintaining cleanliness reduced these problems. The warm cloths brought relief, while the herbs offered mild protection against the conditions that winter created. Without scientific explanations, people relied on tradition, experience, and observation to guide their care routines. For wealthier households, winter hygiene sometimes involved special cloths set aside only for this purpose. These linens were finer, softer, and warmed more quickly than the ones used for general cleaning. They were stored carefully, often near the hearth, or within chests lined with wool. Using dedicated cloths became a sign of status and refinement, indicating that the household had enough resources to separate these items from daily use. Servants responsible for preparing them learned to judge the temperature precisely, ensuring that the cloths never cooled too quickly after leaving the fire. Lower-ranking residents did not have access to the same quality of materials, but still followed the same principles. They used whatever linen they had, warmed it to the best of their ability, and cleansed quickly to avoid losing heat. For them, staying clean during winter was part of survival rather than comfort. The cold seeped into every corner of the castle, and the lack of insulation meant that even a moment of carelessness could lead to illness. The warm cloths became a practical adaptation that allowed them to maintain their bodies while avoiding unnecessary risk. The sensitivity of the area made speed essential. People performed the cleansing in small, enclosed spaces where the air was slightly warmer. Fires were rarely present in these rooms, but their walls held less draught than the larger halls. Some chose to place a small brazier nearby, not for heat but to take the edge off the cold. Even this minimal warmth made the difference between discomfort and safety. Once the routine was finished, the body was covered immediately. The clothing trapped the fading warmth of the clothes and shielded the skin from the drafts that moved unpredictably through the castle. This practice, though simple, revealed how strongly the cold shaped every part of daily hygiene. People adapted their routines to match the environment, finding ways to remove residue without inviting harm. Warm cloth cleansing became a method that balanced cleanliness with safety, offering comfort without requiring exposure to the cold. It reflected the same careful adjustments seen throughout castle life, shaped by caution, habit, and the need to preserve health through long winters. The gentle routines used for these private areas show how necessity guided every intimate aspect of hygiene inside the castle. The balance between warmth and cleanliness created habits that shaped daily life in ways both subtle and essential. Further routines involving the care of skin in harsher conditions revealed just how resourceful people had to be in their struggle against the cold. Caring for the skin inside a medieval castle meant confronting the constant dryness that drifted through the air during winter. The cold pressed against the body from every direction, drawing moisture out of the skin until it tightened, cracked, and became painful. Stone walls absorbed the chill and radiated it back slowly, ensuring that even moments spent near the hearth did little to ease the dryness that accumulated throughout the day. People's hands and feet suffered the most, but the face, arms, and legs also reacted to the harsh environment. Without more advanced remedies, households relied on the materials they trusted most. Animal fat, warmed gently and applied carefully, became one of the only effective ways to protect the skin from the demands of the season. Goose fat and sheep fat were used most frequently. These fats softened easily when placed near a fire and spread smoothly across the skin, forming a thin layer that offered both warmth and protection. The thick texture helped seal moisture into the skin, preventing cracks from deepening. People learned that applying the fat before bed allowed it to soak in slowly through the night. By morning, the skin felt less stiff, and the small fissures caused by the cold became less painful. Though the scent of the fat was strong, people accepted it willingly because the relief it brought far outweighed the discomfort. In the deepest cold, even this heavy scent became familiar, a reminder that some parts of the body could still be shielded from the harsh winter air. Hands required special care. The constant need to handle objects in cold rooms caused the skin to split along the knuckles and across the palms. Each movement sent a quick sting through the hand, making even simple tasks difficult. People warmed small amounts of fat near the hearth, spreading it carefully across the hands until the skin absorbed what it could. The warmth of the fat eased stiffness, and the film it left behind helped reduce friction during work. Servants who spent their days moving between drafty corridors applied the fat frequently, using it as a protective barrier against the cold they could never fully escape. Feet received the same attention. The skin on the heels cracked easily from contact with cold floors and stiff footwear. These cracks deepened over time and made walking more painful. People rubbed warm fat into the soles and heels, letting the mixture soften the skin before covering the feet with thick wool socks. The warmth held beneath the fabric made the feet feel less brittle, allowing people to move through the castle with greater ease. This practice became essential during the coldest months, when even short walks across stone floors could leave the feet aching. The fat was also used to treat areas of the body that reacted strongly to winter dryness. The elbows, legs, and sometimes the face received small amounts of the warmed mixture. People avoided applying it too heavily in visible areas, as the sheen of animal fat on the skin was not considered desirable. Instead, they used it sparingly, blending it into the skin until the shine faded. This approach allowed them to remain comfortable without appearing oily or unkempt. For nobles, attendants performed these routines with steady hands, warming the fat precisely and applying it in a controlled manner. For lower-ranking residents, the process was simpler, but no less important. Preparing the fat required patience. Large pieces of animal fat were rendered slowly near the fire, allowing impurities to separate. The clearer portion was kept in small containers made of wood or clay. These containers were stored near warm areas to prevent the fat from solidifying too much. During especially cold nights, the fat hardened quickly despite the warmth of the hearth, and people had to warm small portions in their hands before applying them. This added step made the routine slower, but also allowed the person to gauge the temperature with greater accuracy. The use of animal fat revealed how people adapted their resources to the demands of the environment. They lacked oils and lotions that might have been available in warmer climates, so they relied on what remained stable in the cold. Fat provided a simple, effective solution that did not freeze easily and remained spreadable even during the harshest winter conditions. The thick layer it left behind helped keep heat close to the skin, acting as a natural shield against the air that continually pulled warmth away. Though the method might seem heavy or uncomfortable by modern standards, it fit seamlessly into the rhythms of castle life. People understood that without this protective layer, the skin would deteriorate quickly. Cracked hands interfered with work, cracked feet made walking painful, and cracked skin in any area became vulnerable to infection. The fat reduced these risks and allowed people to continue their routines with fewer interruptions. It was not a luxury but a necessity, shaped by the realities of living in a structure where the cold remained constant. Applying fat became a quiet ritual performed near the fire, much like other forms of winter hygiene. The warmth of the flames softened the mixture and eased the tension in the skin. Each application created a brief moment of comfort, a small defense against an environment that offered little relief. This routine, repeated throughout the season, formed an essential part of daily life for anyone who lived within the castle's cold walls. The care given to the skin reveals how people use simple resources to defend themselves against the harsh demands of winter. These routines formed a protective barrier that allowed daily life to continue despite the unyielding cold. Additional methods used to maintain comfort relied on similar forms of preparation, and revealed even more about how people adapted to the castle's environment. Bathing inside a medieval castle was not a simple act of stepping into warm water. The structure of the castle made this impossible. The cold settled into every stone, and the winter air drifted endlessly through doorways and cracks in the walls. Water cooled almost as fast as it was heated, and fire struggled to warm spaces larger than a small corner of a room. Because of this, full baths were rare and required a level of preparation that touched nearly every part of the household. When the decision was made to bathe, everything shifted around that moment. Work paused, servants adjusted their duties, and the entire environment had to be shaped to shield the body from the cold. Baths relied on large wooden tubs that could be moved through the castle. These tubs were brought into whichever room offered the most reliable warmth. In most cases, this meant a chamber positioned near one of the larger hearths. The tub was placed close enough for the fire to cut through the chill, but far enough that the heat would not dry the wood or weaken its joints. Once the tub was in position, the servants began the long process of heating water. Metal pots filled with cold water were carried to the kitchen hearth, where the flames burned strongest. The pots remained there until the water reached a steady heat, then were lifted away and carried carefully to the room where the tub sat waiting. This process continued for a long time. One pot of heated water was not enough. Dozens were required, sometimes more, depending on the size of the tub and the temperature of the room. As the servants walked back and forth with pots of steaming water, the heat drifted upward and disappeared into the open air. By the time the water reached the tub, it had already cooled slightly. Servants compensated by pouring faster and heating additional pots to higher temperatures. The goal was simple. The bath water had to remain warm enough to prevent shock to the body. Any delay risked allowing the cold to settle over the tub, and even a brief chill could undo all the effort that had gone into preparing the bath. The person bathing waited nearby, layered in blankets to conserve body heat. Removing clothing too early would expose the skin to the draft that crept along the stone floor. Once the water reached the right temperature, the servant stepped back, and the bather approached the tub slowly, careful not to let the cold touch the skin directly. Slipping into the water brought immediate relief. The warmth sank into the muscles and eased the tension caused by constant exposure to chilled air. For a moment, the cold of the castle felt distant. The fire added a subtle glow to the room, softening shadows and making the space feel gentler than usual. The bath did not last long. Even with the fire nearby, the water cooled steadily. The surface lost heat first, creating a thin layer that encouraged the bather to dip lower, seeking the remaining warmth. Servants hovered close enough to add hot water when needed, but remained quiet in their movements to avoid disrupting the fragile comfort of the moment. The bather washed quickly, understanding that lingering too long would invite the cold back into the water. When the heat finally thinned, the bath ended. The bather stepped out of the tub and was wrapped immediately in thick blankets warmed near the hearth. The transition from water to air was the most delicate part of the entire process. If the body cooled too quickly, discomfort or illness could follow. Once the bather was dressed again, the servants removed the water from the tub one pot at a time. Carrying cold, heavy water across a stone floor required strength and patience. Only when the tub was empty could it be dried, polished lightly, and stored until the next time it was needed. The entire process left the room warm for only a brief period. Once the fire settled and the steam faded, the cold crept back in, reclaiming the corners and walls as if nothing had happened. Bathing in this way required planning, resources, and cooperation from everyone in the household. Only wealthy families could afford to organize such an event regularly. For them, bathing became a symbol of comfort and status, even though the experience itself remained constrained by the realities of castle architecture. For lower-ranking residents, full baths were even rarer. The effort needed to heat water and maintain warmth meant that most people